Hi everyone, it's Julie from Sprouts and Stems here. Today's video is going to be all about Pothos care. Pothos care, Pothos care. I think it's Pothos, but I just can't bring myself to say Pothos for whatever reason. So Pothos care. I did take a little bit of a break. I think it's been about 2 or more weeks since I last posted a video, and thank you for bearing with me. I'm back. I'm excited to get back to posting regular content, and I hope you all also had happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. If you don't celebrate anything, I hope you had a good week. And okay, so now let's get into the Pothos Care Guide. You've probably heard that the pothos is an amazing beginner plant and one of the easiest plants you could possibly have. And for the most part, I do think that's true, but I also just want to say, if you struggle with this plant, it's okay, don't feel bad. Everyone has those plants that people claim are like so easy that they just can't take care of, or at least they haven't cracked the code yet. And I definitely have some plants like that for me. For the most part though, I do think the pothos is a really easy plant for beginners or someone who doesn't have the time or just doesn't want to spend the time taking care of plants. It's very low maintenance. And some people might even consider them kind of basic. They're just always kind of like there in the grocery store, in big box stores. Sometimes people use them as like filler plants. They're not always the star of the show. But I personally love pothos. I love any plants that are viney, hangy downy. I always do this for hangy downy. Anyway, I love any plants that are vines, tropical, lush looking. I just love that look. So the pothos is definitely that. This is a neon pothos. I got it at Home Depot. I put it in this cute little teapot I got from Goodwill. And there are many different varieties of pothos you can get. Like this neon one, you can tell the leaves are neon, hence the name. But for the most part, pothos care is essentially the same no matter which variety you get. So starting with light, this is probably the one place where pothos varieties differ or have the potential to differ from one another. So light, pothos love medium to bright indirect light. Pretty much as simple as that. The only thing is if you have a lighter variety or a variegated variety, it's going to want more light to maintain its variegation. And the reason for that is because lighter parts of leaves or lighter leaves in general have a less chlorophyll and they need to make up for that with more light. It's a little bit more complicated, but that's essentially what it is. So if you do get a variegated variety, such as the Marble Queen pothos, or actually, I have, 1 second. Let me get you an example. In this terrarium I recently made, there's an Pearls and Jade pothos. And that, as you can see, is pretty heavily variegated. It sits right next to my greenhouse cabinet, which radiates enough light to keep this happy. But yeah, so if you have a variety like this one or other variegated varieties, it's going to want bright indirect light. Most pothos can also live in lower light levels. Just know that they probably won't grow as fast in lower light, but they're pretty low maintenance, easy plants, so it's not gonna like complain if you don't have the exact right light level. Watering. Now, I've said this a few times before, but I think it applies to all aspects of plant care, but I think it applies to watering the most because I do think watering is what intimidates maybe new plant parents the most about plant care. We definitely overcomplicate houseplants a lot, but all you really need to do is just picture the plant in its natural habitat and try to replicate that. So pothos are found in the jungle, basically. The jungle is a warm, for the most part, wet, humid place. And if you think about it, because it's so humid, any like soil or like the ground of a jungle is probably never going to be completely bone dry. It's always going to stay, for the most part, moist. So that means this plant doesn't really ever want to totally dry out. You don't want to keep it sopping wet all the time, but stick your finger in. If you don't feel any moisture in the top inch or so of the soil, then it's definitely time to water it. Just be careful if you don't have a drainage hole, like this one doesn't. You'll just want to be a little bit more careful. But for the most part, they're also pretty low maintenance when it comes to watering. This one, since I was just away for about a week or so, it hasn't been watered. You might be able to tell it's a little bit droopy. It's dry on top. It's also pretty light. Once you start, I guess, getting to know your plants a bit more, you'll recognize when the pot is just like super light and doesn't have a lot of moisture left in it. And you'll also be able to use that as a sign for when to water. So to summarize, pothos like to be watered for the most part when the top inch or so, give or take, inch or so of the soil is dry. Okay, my arms are getting tired, so I'm going to keep it on my lap for a little bit. So I'll just be kind of like a head popping out of my plant. Now on to humidity. It's the same sort of concept I just mentioned. These are tropical, jungle-y plants. They definitely will thrive in humidity, but as I mentioned, they're also just so low maintenance. They're not going to like complain too much or get too mad at you if there's no humidity. Don't worry about that part too much for this plant. Just know, like, if you do have extra humidity to provide, it'll definitely appreciate that. And for potting mix, I keep saying this, but as I mentioned, pothos are super low maintenance. I know some people like to make their own aeroid mix, but for this, I just use regular houseplant potting mix with another handful or so of perlite. You don't even have to add in perlite. It just helps with drainage. And since this doesn't have any drainage holes, I definitely wanted to add in some more drainage just in case. So regular houseplant potting mix that you buy from the store is fine. Ultimately, it just wants a well-draining potting mix because although it doesn't want to totally dry out, it likes to stay moist. Moist and wet are two very different things. So you never want your plant to just stay like sopping wet all the time. Next, we could talk about fertilizer. I really don't fertilize pothos much. I don't fertilize a good number of my plants just because it's something I like to do only if I feel like they could use that extra boost. And pothos are pretty like fast growers for the most part as it is, but you can totally fertilize yours if you want to give it that extra boost. You don't need any kind of fancy fertilizer or anything, just a regular houseplant fertilizer that you could buy at the store, at your local greenhouse somewhere is fine. Always err on the side of caution, meaning under fertilizing as opposed to over fertilizing. Over fertilization is actually a pretty easy way to hurt your plant, so just be careful with that. Follow the instructions that it says on the package in terms of like dosage, and like once or twice a month is fine. You don't need to overdo it. Repotting, I don't repot on a set schedule. I don't repot like strictly once a year or anything. I just see if growth is stunted, if you see like all of a sudden a lot of yellowing leaves, that probably means it's pretty root bound and would like a bigger home. But other than that, I just keep an eye on my plants. This one fits nicely in here, but if it looks like it is getting too big for its pot, then repot it. And typically it's best to use a pot the next size up or maybe like 2 sizes up, but you don't want to go too big because say if you have a little plant, like if I were to put this in like a pot this big, that could lead to overwatering. There's all that excess soil that'll just stay wet for a long time, and the plant won't be able to use all of that. It'll just be sitting there, so that'll lead to overwatering. So just go a size or two up with your pot. And yeah, this one I just potted a month, 2 months ago, so it should be good in here for a while. In terms of how you display your pothos, it's really up to you. You could put it on a moss pole. Those are two bendable moss poles that I have, but I also have just regular straight ones in my plant supplies elsewhere. So yeah, if this one isn't big enough to climb, and I don't have plans at the moment to have it climb, but maybe in the future when it gets bigger, I'll put it on a moss pole. So plants that climb in the wild like to climb in your home too. Just because it is now a house plant doesn't mean that it changes, what it would like to do naturally. Pothos will definitely appreciate having something, a moss pole basically, to climb, but they'll also be just fine in just a regular pot or however you want to display it. But yeah, if you've ever been to somewhere tropical, like I took a trip to Hawaii about a year and a half ago and visited some of the jungles, and it was just incredible to see these ginormous pothos plants climbing up the trees. I'm sure I still have some pictures of that somewhere on my phone, so if I can find them, I'll put one in here just because it's just like amazing to see house plants in the wild. And last but not least, I'll cover pruning. It can be helpful to control your plant in a way that you want it to look. So basically, you would just snip off. I'm trying to find a node since this one isn't too big at this point. You would just snip off if you wanted to cut off a section, remove like a wonky section or whatever. Snip off above a node. So there's a node, I don't know if you can see it, the node is where leaves grow out of the main stem. There's one right there. You would snip off right above the node, right here. You're doing what you want, which is to remove a part of the plant that you want to remove. And you'll also be encouraging that node to sprout new growth, because nodes are where new growth comes from. So that node on the plant will sprout a new leaf, and that will make your plant bushier. So say if you had one really long vine that was like super leggy, there's a leaf here, and then there was no leaves until like another foot on the vine. You can cut off that empty piece right above that first leaf, and a new leaf will sprout right from that node. So that'll take away the legginess. I hope that makes sense. I know nodes and propagation versus pruning can always be kind of confusing. I hope that makes sense. Pruning isn't necessary, but can be helpful to control size, shape, and things of that nature. So I think that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this gorgeous plant that needs to be watered that I'll be doing right after this. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and have a great day. Bye.